Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cosmic Connection. This is your place to explore the order and the beauty of the cosmos and your connection to it all. My name is Amanda Walsh. I'm the founder of Astrology Hub, and I am here with our favorite cosmic navigator, Rick Merlin Levine. And today we have a very interesting, relevant topic for you all. And it was inspired, by what's happening in the world, but also by a little survey that I put out to our inner circle members, asking them what they would love to hear Rick talk about. We had several requests for this, and people are wanting to know what Rick has to say about other life forms or beings in different constellations or planetary systems. And so today we're going to be talking about extraterrestrials, disclosure, and astrology. And I know Rick has some surprises up his sleeve, so I'm really excited to dive in. Where do you want to start with this, Rick?
I want to start in a very strange place that's going to seem unrelated, but you know how I think. When I was in Rome, Italy, I'm guessing this was probably about a dozen years ago, I made it my point to go to the spot where the last human being that the church burned at the stake publicly was where it occurred. It's marked. There's a marker there. This is the spot that in, I can't remember the year, 16 something, maybe a little earlier, where, and if someone has their Google active, I can't do three things at once and want to pop it into the chat box. This was the burning at the stake of a man named Giordano Bruno. Now, Giordano Bruno had a couple of distinctions. I mean, obviously, the fact that he was the last person to be burned at the stake for his heresy is a place in history all unto itself. But Giordano Bruno actually believed that this is right around the time when we're beginning to think that some people are beginning to think, like the Greeks actually already knew, that the earth isn't the center of it all, that the sun was the center. And Giordano Bruno traveled around Europe learning, studying, and teaching, and came back to Rome kind of as a bit of a hero, like small town boy makes big. But obviously the small town was a big town. It was Rome. And thank you, Anne, who's always good on this stuff. There's a link there for a biography for Giordano Bruno in the chat box.
Yeah, and also Susan gave us the date you're looking for. It's February 17th, 1600. Thank you, Susan.
Perfect. And like I said, I thought it was 1600s, but I knew it had to be really, really early. Incidentally, that date of his being burned at the stake is in my historical compilation of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction opposition cycles, because that year was a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And of course, Saturn-Pluto conjunctions often are associated with war, but they're often associated with the changing of the intellectual boundaries that we have. And as such, even Copernicus was born, the guy who wrote the book on the revolution of spheres that basically ushered in the scientific rationale in modern times that the sun was the center and not the earth. Copernicus was born on a Saturn-Pluto square, and on his deathbed, he was given a copy of the book absolutely hot off the press. And there was a Saturn-Pluto square then. And Galileo's house arrest and his saying, all of that was tied to Saturn-Pluto and Saturn-Pluto conjunction opposition cycle. And Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake at the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Incidentally, even Edward Hubble, who discovered there were other galaxies that occurred on a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. So we have this whole thing of not only national boundaries being changed, but our metaphysical intellectual boundaries. So wow. Giordano Bruno came back to Rome basically clearly teaching what he knew. And what he knew was that the sun was the center of our little area, and it was a star like every other star in the sky. And therefore, all the other stars in the sky had planets around them like Earth that had life. And what does this mean? Was Jesus on all of them at the same time? And the church didn't like this, so they burned him. But the point is that Giordano Bruno grappled with the question of if our little sun in our little local neighborhood is a star, and if there are actually too many stars in the sky to count, and those stars have planets around them that have life on them, what does that do for our idea that we're going to go to hell if we don't accept Jesus Christ, who was born on earth as the Son of God, as our Savior? So this is kind of a setup to the question. It's the whole question of extraterrestrial or non-human intelligence is a question of our time. And in fact, even going back to the 1960s, when it was discovered that dolphins are highly intelligent, their brain capacity is somewhere twice the size of ours. We don't know that size matters here, but they also have very sophisticated languaging skills, and their sensory abilities. What they don't have is written language. And yet we also know that there are cultures on Earth, especially in the tropics, for example, in the Amazon basin, where there are complex cultural tribes with complex cultural knowledge that goes way beyond even what we moderners think as intelligence, and yet they don't have any written technology. And so what distinguishes humans perhaps from other forms of intelligence may not be just our intelligence. It may be our development of technology, here in particular, the technology of scribbling on paper that recalls metaphysical or mental events. So in the 1960s, people like John Lilly and people began to do experiments with communication, intra-species communication. It was in that time and in the years in the 70s that the first chimpanzees were actually taught sign language. It was during that period of time, too, when research began to come out that when we say someone's parroting me, it means that they're just saying what they hear with no consciousness or awareness. And it began to come out that in research that when parrots, especially African grays, when they communicate or repeat something, that they actually do have awareness of the words and what they mean. I've actually had experience with an African gray who said it wanted a particular type of food, and when it was given something else, would spit it out and would say, no, parrot wants blah, blah, and did it until they got that. And then, so this idea that we hold the pinnacle of evolution and that it stops here because we've now reached the pinnacle of evolution is something that we've been slowly grappling with for some 400 years or more, but certainly going back to Giordano Bruno in 1600, who was grappling with this very, very same question. And so I just wanted to put this in a little bit of historical context because it's not a new question. What is new, though, is that we now have technologies that actually can record events that we can then play back. And there are other things here too, but this is like people realizing that the treatment, for example, of African Americans by police didn't just start spiking in the last 3 or 4 years out of nowhere. It's just that people had cell phones. And so all of a sudden these interactions were being recorded. If you don't see it, it doesn't exist. If a tree falls in the forest and we can't hear it, it didn't make a sound. And so from that standpoint, we've reached a point where our technology has increased and our ability to capture some of these events. But of course, that raises an issue because it also creates the ability for us to fake media, to make it look like something is real. Just watch any movie and and where does reality end and fantasy begin? It's hard to know. I first got interested in what were then called UFOs, unidentified flying objects, which are now technically being identified as being called UAPs, as unidentified aerial phenomena. And I got interested in this. Geez, I must have been 13, 14, 15, gobbling up science fiction like crazy, and then coming across a book and several books. And it was around that time that it was disclosed that the Air Force had been collecting information, compiling it in a thing that was called Project Blue Book. The Condon Report then came out, and it acknowledged that there were unidentified things, but never ever acknowledging that they were alien, or but when I say the word alien, I don't mean from another country. I mean extraterrestrial, from another planet, apparently. And then there's the whole scenario of what happened or may have happened in Roswell, New Mexico, in the summer of 1947. And books have been written about this, and I'm not here to necessarily go through all those details, but the story is that there is a massive amount of evidence, much of which has been very neatly lost or destroyed over time, that referenced an unidentified flying object that landed or crash landed, and that actual surviving non-human extraterrestrial beings were saved, that the military swooped in a major way, made the whole thing disappear. It was a weather balloon. Nothing happened. There's nothing up my sleeve. Well, I don't have a sleeve, but there's these are not the droids you're looking for. There's nothing here. Just walk along and everything's cool. And but there's just a huge amount of information that points to something other than that. And so for decades now, there has been a growing intellectual exploration. Intellectual might not be the right word. Academic, rational exploration into what happened there. Why do so many people claim to have either sightings and or experiences that go way beyond sightings? And what does this mean for humanity? Well, like I said, I got interested in this in my early mid-teens, but when I was in my mid-20s, this is now in the 70s, all of a sudden there was a proliferation of what was at that time called pyramid power. It was a huge fad that has now settled into just a piece of this whole lore that we're going to be talking about. And at that time, there was a lot of outside of the realm of academia, both investigation into the archaeology, the geology, and perhaps the actual physics of what these pyramids may have been that did not match up with the party line that we were told. And of course, we're always told it's a great mystery. It's a great mystery. We don't know. But then when someone says, well, it looks like it was this, they go, oh, no, it can't be that. And one of the things that came from that time, and I met both of the co-authors of this book back in 1993 or 4. And the two people I'm talking about are Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval. And both of them are still around. They've both written many books that kind of rewrite some of the archaeological history that we are taught as the party line of quote unquote archaeology, geology, science, whatever. And Graham Hancock wrote a book called Fingerprints of the Gods, and Robert Bauval is, I think, best known for his book, The Orion Mystery, because as it turns out, the pyramids on the face of Giza, on the plains of Giza, that we call it the pyramid, the Great Pyramid, the pyramid. You don't even have to say the Great Pyramid of Egypt. It's just the Great Pyramid or the pyramids. Well, it turns out that there are pyramids all over the planet. That pyramids have been discovered in Turkey, in China, under the water. I mean, this is not the pyramids in Egypt are no longer considered to be unique. But one of the interesting things about them, and their geometry is so precise that modern architects probably couldn't quite duplicate the exactness of the geometry. It's geodetic, meaning its location on the planet. It's facing to true north. The size of the pyramids, which are actually mathematical ratios of the equator, of the size of the equator of Earth, and of the distance from the equator to the North Pole. These numbers are all built into the pyramids. And Peter Tompkins' book, The Mysteries of the Great Pyramids, or The Secret of the Great Pyramids, is the grandfather book that if you want your mind blown and want to lose a few months of your life into thinking about things, that's the book. The secret life of the pyramids, secret of the Great Pyramids, Peter Tompkins. Who incidentally also wrote a book called The Secret Life of Plants many years later, in which he showed experiments that revealed that plants like a simple philodendron in someone's living room can actually register spikes of human thought. That when you hook it up to a lie detector, in effect, that you can actually, when he first did this, or actually the guy's name was Clive Baxter. How do I remember this shit? That Clive Baxter actually was he worked as a interviewer with a lie detector, which basically measures the resistance, the galvanic skin response. And he hooked up a philodendron to one of these and thought, and he had it going, and it was kind of picking up on something. And he said, well, what am I going to do to see if it can actually register, pain? I know what I'll do is I'll get a match and I'll burn one of its leaves. And he looked around, found a match, lit it and held it under one of its leaves. And then he looked at the polygraph and he realized the plant reacted to the moment he thought that he would set the fire rather than the moment that he did. And this started a whole bunch of research. Anyhow, Peter Tompkins, The Secret of the Pyramids, and so on. So what Robert Bauval discovered was the odd thing. One of the mysteries of the pyramids is that although the two larger ones are in a perfect straight line and that it's oriented towards true north, that the third pyramid is slightly off center. And Robert Bauval, basically by using mathematical calculations and his knowledge of the precession of the equinox, he realized that if you took it back in time 12,000 years, which was older than anyone had thought that the pyramids might be, that the three pyramids on the plain of Giza actually were the exact mathematical distances between the three stars in the belt of Orion. Mm-hmm. This is why his book was called The Orion Mystery. Mm-hmm. Where did the ancients get this knowledge? Where did they get this information? Someone here mentioned the lines mostly in the Andes in Peru, that are these that you can only see from the air, from, you know, the same thing, the Great Horse in England. There's this thing that's massive, laid out with like a white chalky material that was dug into the earth, and you can't see these things unless you're up several miles, you know. But
Nina calls them the Nazca lines.
Yeah, I think that's the name of the of the indigenous people that were there. But these are, again, if you Google them, there's just many, many, many instances of these lines that are drawn on Earth that are in particular patterns. But there's no way you can see them on Earth, and you can't even see them enough to make the perspective work. You have to go way up into the air. Anyhow, there's things like this again and again and again. All right. So then along comes a few books in the, I think they were mid 60s, late 60s, early 70s. One of them called Chariot of the Gods. And actually, Van Dyneken and a man who studied with or read the material of one of these guys, who actually translated a lot of the Mesopotamian, what do you call them? Not glyphs, but there's a word for the, not hieroglyphs in Mesopotamia. There's a word for them. Someone pop it in the chat box. My brain just can't remember. Anyhow, and he made conclusions from actually, Zechariah Sitchin was his name, by the way. He was a scholar who actually read these Mesopotamian glyphs. And he realized that their writing was filled with references that were kind of obscured by modern academics, saying they were just made up. Chariots of fire, Ezekiel spinning wheels, you know, in the heavens. You know, these images come back and back again and again and again. However, Zechariah Sitchin made the jump that, in fact, there was just ongoing and regular communication between the ancient Mesopotamians and these alleged extraterrestrial beings. And that has turned into an entire study, a rabbit hole unto itself, that actually a second generation Sitchin, I don't know, Zechariah Sitchin scholar, a man named Michael Tellinger. And this book is it's like a 700-page tome. And there's lots of pictures of stone formations in here that are way too old for us to know exactly what they are, with their locations all around, and with pyramids and various structures, and so on. Michael Tellinger takes Zechariah Sitchin's work to the next level. And I think he's from South Africa. And it turns out there are these stone formations all through South Africa. And Zechariah Sitchin said that basically the idea is that this particular race of non-terrestrial intelligence, now notice I'm not saying the aliens or the ETs, I'm saying this particular instance was a intelligent culture who live on this planet that the Mesopotamians identified as Nirubu, which has a 3,500-year orbit around the sun, is actually a planet, but it goes out way past Pluto and then comes in all the way inside the orbit of Earth. And that every 3,500 years, when this planet comes close to Earth, there is communication and exchange between this particular species and Earth, because this particular species needs gold, the element gold, to survive. And there are large deposits of gold on Earth. And this particular story, now I'm agnostic. I'm not here saying this is the truth, nor am I saying this is all crazy. Well, it may sound crazy. I'm just giving you the facts as I know them. So the ancient Nerubians, I don't know what you call them, Nerubers.
Nibiru is what Kima is saying.
Say again?
Nibiru.
Yeah, Nibiru, but I'm just saying I don't know what you call people who live on Nibiru. Yeah. So these aliens, meaning that they were not from here, needed the gold on Earth. And at that time, we're talking hundreds of thousands of years ago, they didn't have a lot of time when they were coming through this area. And so what they needed is they needed a species intelligent enough to mine the gold for them. Slave species of God. So the story is that they infused chimpanzees with some of their DNA to create the race of humanity, to create, okay. Now, again, I'm not saying this is it, but I'm saying that there's a pretty fascinating story around all of this stuff. And they didn't, basically the whole concept here was that they needed people who were intelligent enough that could actually do the work of mining the gold. And then they developed this technology for transporting the gold interdimensionally, whether it was through pyramids or these strange stone structures up to the Nerubian spaceships. Now, I'm only here making the point that there's nothing new about the idea that we are not alone. But bringing this up to more modern times, there are waves and waves and waves of sightings during certain periods of time where it's not, I mean, we hear some things about some things in the United States. Yeah, I mean, we have issues like crop circles and, and how and where do they come from and their complexity, and are they generated by an extraterrestrial, meaning off-Earth intelligence, or are they generated by some form of inter or intradimensional intelligence, something that has to do with consciousness that's not attached to a body. And here's where the discussion of, do you believe in ETs, UFOs, UAPs, EIOs, whatever you want to call them. The likelihood is that everything in the universe is intelligent, that we have an artificial boundary that we create between animate and inanimate. In fact, wonderful book by Lyle Watson called The Secret Life of Inanimate Objects. It's just a brilliant, brilliant book. There's something about inanimate objects that have a consciousness too. It's why this particular inanimate object has a different feel and or energy than this piece of fluorite. Its consciousness does not require a human body. We've talked about this when we've talked about past lives or disincarnation, as I like to call it, disincarnation and reincarnation. But the whole question of, are there other life forms aside from human beings, to me is as stupid a question as is, did the Wuhan coronavirus come from the Wuhan coronavirus laboratory? I mean, come on. It's like it's like the question of, is there intelligent life in the universe, I think, is a valid one. The one that I wonder about these days is there intelligent life on Earth? Now, as the space age began, and as we began to launch things into space, the United States government hired the Brookings Institution, which is like one of these political, intellectual think tanks, to explore the likelihood of, as we went into outer space, what would that do to human thought? What would that, if we encountered or alien life of any sort, what would that do? And the Brookings Institute basically came back with a very clear statement that the discovery of extraterrestrial life would disintegrate the social fabric here on Earth. Whether that's true or not, that actually set into motion the whole thing of top-level government suppression. The public cannot know about this. And this is where Richard C. Hoagland comes in, who is a proponent of a number of, well, we might call them conspiracy theories, but theories about NASA's relationship with, or the United States government's relationship with extraterrestrial intelligence and or technology. And Hoagland's kind of breakthrough book was a book called The Monuments of Mars. And then the subtitle, I think, is something like the city, Cydonia, the city on the edge of forever, because apparently on the first NASA exploration of Mars, where they took a lot of high resolution photography, but not landed, but from up in the sky, from orbiters, that there were photographs that came back that showed quite clearly what looked like large sphinx-like faces that were facing upward, and the mathematics between them were similar to the mathematics of the shapes of the Great Pyramid in Giza, and the mathematics of the entire area where those things were spotted in photographs showed geometry that doesn't normally occur in nature, things that were exactly 90 degrees, things that were in golden mean proportion to each other. And we've talked a little bit here about the quintile, the golden mean, what's called the divine proportion, 1.61803, so on, and how that is actually the mathematical relationship between Venus and Earth. And why is that important here? Because those same ratios were discovered in this area on the face of Mars that just don't occur, in large formations. It's like, and I forgot to say, of course, the important thing here is that golden mean is the actual basis of the mathematics of the dimensions of the Great Pyramid. If anyone who cares, if you measure from the tip of the pyramid down to the middle of one side, and then measure from that point to the edge, to one corner at the base, the larger the distance from the point, the top down, to the measurement on the base equals 1.6180339 to just a ridiculous accuracy, which is that same ratio. So Hoagland basically, and then so these photos got out. They were NASA public domain, and then people started writing about them. Hoagland kind of being into that whole thing. I think I mentioned offline that he was a science advisor to Walter Cronkite during the original moon landings back in the summer of '68, I guess it was, somewhere in there. And so Hoagland was the first person to put together this finding of this high-level policy from the Brookings Institution to describe why we don't know that they are here. Now, taking that forward, there's a lot of belief in the community that there has been a 30, 40 year, 40 plus year softening of these ideas, so that when disclosure eventually occurs or will occur, that it doesn't make people crazy, because more and more people now take all this for granted. And there is deep conspiratorial, I only use the word conspiracy not to dismiss it, but to say that there's a lot of people who breathe together, conspire around these issues. But there's a lot of belief that that the funding of 2001: A Space Odyssey was actually funded largely by the CIA as a way of getting the public to begin to think about intelligent life on the moon, on Jupiter, and what that might mean and how we might relate to it. ET, there's all these things in media, Star Wars, Star Wars, certainly. But even going back to the original Star Trek, we became as a culture much more comfortable with that idea, even though it exists, quote unquote, in fantasy. We become comfortable enough with it that when the government finally says, as they did in the last month, that yes, there are things up there that we are documenting and have documented that are not only not explainable, but the technology that we observe is significant enough that we've created within the Pentagon, and I think it's within the Navy, or I'm not sure which division it is, but to the tune of millions of dollars a year for years have been allocated not to the question of do UFOs or UAPs exist, but to what is their technology? What does that mean for our defense? And what do we need to know about it? And how can we duplicate this technology? This is a huge shift. And this is what came out within the last couple of months. And why it's on everyone's mind so significantly right now is that there is a document that has been summarized. There will still be some intelligence, or what's the word, secret, top secret information that won't be disclosed. But we're expecting now, because it's by law, there is this now law that was passed by Congress that basically is going to require this document to be made publicly available sometime this week, next week, the week after. But we're like right on the edge of it. And people who are in the know have been talking about disclosure for years, but it seems like we're now at that next step. Now, I know this was all longer than we wanted to do to get here, but it's hugely important for astrology. I'll stop talking for a moment and let you respond.
Well, I don't know if I should yet. I'm wondering if you should tie it up with the astrology. I mean, there's so many questions. Many, because one of the things is, first of all, I'd love to know what that Brookings Institute report, what it actually said to justify its conclusion that it would break down the fabric of society. Because obviously it was convincing enough that it's been, supposedly that's the reason why it's been kept secret. The second thing is, if the reason that they're disclosing it now is because we're ready and they've been sort of like softening us up. I mean, first of all, that says a lot about how the media is purposefully influencing our thoughts. I mean, but then also something Armchair Astrologer says is, and it's a concern I know a lot of people have, disclosure will totally be used to stage a black flag event to unite us against a common enemy. It's their MO. We are watching it play out. So either you're thinking, oh, well, they were protecting society by not disclosing it and getting us ready, and or they've been hiding it. Why? And has it been for the perfect timing of like, oh, look, we're all united, but we have this enemy that's outside of us. Now we can unite against that instead of uniting against each other, which, I think is both scenarios seem like they have some likelihood to them.
Right. And then there's the whole scenario that they may not be enemies, or maybe there may be, like the Star Wars bar, there may be there may be enough different species that some are enemies and some are not. I know you had Barbara Hand Clow on for a podcast recently, and she is very eloquent in her discussion about the timing of these things. There are those people who believe that that the reason why we haven't blown ourselves up already is because we're being watched and cared for, maybe not as much as we would like to. But then there are also people who believe that there are alien species that have cyber programmed themselves into such a state of high intelligence that they don't have emotion and they need human fear that they're harvesting the emotions of humans that generate an energy that they need to live. Now, I'm not here selling any of these points of view.
Well,
I'm
then
just
the Nibiru thing, which would say they're here to mine gold, and then we're being used as. I mean, there's a lot of different theories that we.
yeah. And all I can think of is Henry Winkler, from the the good old day. What was the show that he was on? The Fonz. Henry Winkler was a total UFO student aficionado, and he produced a documentary. This is probably 20 years ago now. And in it, he said, when I was a kid, if you had told me that a UFO had landed on the edge of town, I would have been on my bike so fast and been there like as fast as you could possibly imagine. Now, based upon what I know, I'd just as soon send the production crew. They may not all be friendly. Now, all I'm saying is that it's hubris to think that we are the only intelligent species in the galaxy. I mean, it's as stupid as thinking that the sun is actually revolving around the Earth, and was created on Sunday, or whatever. But I should also say that there are excellent candidates for highly intelligent, evolved life forms, as we know it. Because there could be life forms that are metaphysical, that do not have physicality in the same way that we do. We know consciousness survives death. So what's that to prevent entire civilizations to be existing somehow in other vibratory spectrum? But we know that, for example, satellites around Saturn and Jupiter have ice caps with huge oceans. And we don't know that dolphins may be running the show on this planet in cahoots with aliens. Again, I'm not saying that, but we don't know that they're not, and that they just don't have a printed word like we do, so we don't recognize their intelligence. What all this means, though, for astrology is a couple of quick things here. Number one, astrology, like our consciousness, is geocentric. We live here on Earth. And so the question of how do you do a chart for someone born on a space station above Earth, where's the ascendant? They're moving at 18,000 miles an hour. The difference of 1 second might be the difference of an entire sign, rather than just, and if we as a species figure out how to colonize the moon, which is likely that we will, if, again, we don't destroy ourselves in our adolescent, aggression that we seem to be experiencing as a species, or to Mars. So when you're born on Mars, where's Earth in your chart? There is no Mars in your chart. You are on Mars. So this whole idea of, and here's the important thing that we know as astrologers, we know that time is created by the revolution of an object around a center. That's what creates time. Whether it's the day, night, the spin of the Earth, it's still the revolution of the surface of the Earth around the polar axis, or the year. The idea of, we say, how old is the universe? Oh, it's 18 billion years old. Well, the universe is a big place. And why is the universe how do we decide the age of the universe based upon one little speck of dust going around another in one little tiny corner of a galaxy that's in one corner of this immense universe? What kind of hubris is that? And so rather than just talking about geocentric or heliocentric, what about chronocentric? Time is a very different thing if you live in Italy compared to if you live 300 miles north, 200 miles north of Milan in Switzerland. You guys have a completely different understanding of how time works in the universe. because in Italy, time is intimately tied with emotions, whereas in Switzerland, time is intimately disassociated from emotions, and you have precision clockwork. I mean, even every astrologer in the world uses software that relies on the software that drives the site astro.com, Alois Triangle site. And he's published the Swiss ephemeris, which is considered to be the Swiss pocket watch of the planets. It's the most accurate ephemeris that we have available. That's why most software out there is licensing the Swiss ephemeris from astro.com, Astrodienst. But again, that's very different than in Italy. If a train leaves within 15 or 20 minutes of when it's supposed to, yeah, it's Italy. It's okay. You'll get there. So the question about alien intelligence, and I say alien, I mean extraterrestrial, is not just where are they from and what are they doing here. Part of the question might also be, what was it that we as humans did that caused them to cut us off from the flow of interplanetary trade and communication? There are those people who believe that was Atlantis, that in Atlantis, the energy went so totally awry that we destroyed everything and we were basically punished. We were excommunicated. We became aliens. We became unwanted aliens until we as a species got our planet shit together so that we could play well with others. Is that true? All these things are potential. So what do I believe here? Where do I fall in this? I'm like a kid in a sandbox watching it unfold. I'm happy to be on the edge of this and seeing it unfold. And yet, like some of our commenters in the chat have said, there are so many complex power issues at play. Someone referenced the fact that there is very strong evidence that although we went to the moon in 1968, that what we saw was studio created effects that were done, and that we weren't allowed to see what was going on because they didn't want us to see, like in 2001: A Space Odyssey, them discovering this monolith or a upper class alien housing development. There are structures that many people say that exist on these other planets that actually have been kept from us, and yet there are photographs that we can actually see things that just are anomalous. And there are people like Richard Hoagland and many others, even with the local Perseverance landing, which of course was timed, whether it was on purpose or not, to the Saturn-Uranus square. And the first photographs and the release of the first photographs from the quote unquote face on Mars were also at 1975, I think, was at a Saturn-Uranus square as it is now. And is there a reoccurring theme here? There very well may be, but there are people that believe that Stanley Kubrick was awarded the money to develop a huge budget to do 2001: A Space Odyssey because it was his payment for producing the studio pictures that made us look like that we were seeing us land on the moon. Now, again, I'm not saying that's true. I'm saying that there is a fair amount of evidence that points to that as a possibility. And of course, Arthur C. Clarke, who wrote 2001: A Space Odyssey, was, as a science fiction writer, someone who was incredibly dancing always between what I call science fact and science fiction. So I think the time, as we look at the last time Saturn and Pluto conjoined in Capricorn. Yeah, we know they conjoin every 32 to 38 years because Pluto's orbit is, elliptical, and therefore it's shorter or longer. But we know that when Saturn joined up with Pluto, Saturn was in its primary domicile in Capricorn. The last time that occurred was within 2 months of the Protestant Reformation, of the moment at which Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses on the church wall as a statement of the separation from the politically driven rather than religiously or spiritually driven church. So it's very likely that historically we may look back at this period of time, even though disclosure isn't set to actually occur this week, next month. It may take till the end of the year until other stuff come out, maybe another 3 or 5 years. But again, remember, the Protestant Reformation didn't occur on Halloween night in 1518, I think. It actually took generations for it to unfold and to develop into the power that it was. And so we may look back at 300 or 500 years later at the last time Saturn joined up with Pluto in Capricorn and go, oh my God, we went through all kinds of growth here. Yeah, there was a pandemic, but there was a realignment of our self-awareness around national boundaries and ideologies and the artificiality of race as a tool to create outsiders, and at the same time, the inclusion of non-earthly extraterrestrial consciousness into our awareness. It may all be part of the same thing.
I love that you. Well, I'm hearing my like really bad.
Yeah.
Can you maybe do the headset thing?
I don't think it's that, but yes, I can.
Okay.
The only reason why we haven't heard you echoing a lot is because I haven't let you talk a lot.
Okay, that is better. I don't hear it at all. Okay,
good.
So I love that you brought in the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. So, and for any of you that haven't been following for the last year or so, or 2 years, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction happened in January of 2020. And so what Rick is pointing out is something either you've said this before and I haven't caught it, or you're saying it today for the first time, which is the changing of our intellectual boundaries, that this has been a consistent pattern through time that has expanded intellectual boundaries for humanity when it happens. And I think that's very fascinating to bring in. And I mean, there's so many questions. I have a question. So you said one of the best books for those of us that are interested in starting to explore this further would be The Secret of the Great Pyramids.
Well, no, that is a book that is specifically about the Great Pyramids and its anomalies and its mathematical brilliance. It's nothing to do with aliens. I mean, how did they move those huge things? To think that they did it with slaves and with elephants pulling them up ramps is just stupid. There was some sort of whether it was human technology or an extraterrestrial technology, or whether they were working hand in hand. There's a lot of theory around sound generation. I don't know if people are aware of like the Crystal Castle down in Florida, where this one man by himself built this incredible, you can go there, this incredible castle as an homage to his wife. But he had no contractors, no one ever there. And he did it all himself. And we're talking like huge, huge, all made out of large, I think it was not limestone, but not marble. I can't think of the material. It's just that someone can Google that too. But the point is that it's thought that he did that through some sort of mental, meditative sound creation. And it may be that a lot of these larger, even things like Stonehenge. I had the privilege 2 years ago this week, I was at Stonehenge inside the circle at sunrise on this summer solstice morning. And, you can't imagine the size of these stones until you're there and leaning up against them and looking up at the ones that are, and, they're not just put into place by, 200 people lifting those suckers. And of course, Stonehenge is actually a derivation from Stonehenge, and a hinge, as we know, for the understanding of the cardinal cross, the cardinal signs are hinge points. And the word cardinal etymologically comes from the old word henge or hinge. And so, where were they traveling to? What doors were being opened at these places, at these sacred sites that we moderners just look at and think they're just part of a calendar?
Okay, so they're saying Coral Castle.
Coral Castle. I said, thank you.
Made with coral rock or limestone off the coast of Florida.
It was limestone, yeah.
It would be impossible for a human to build. It's funny, my daughter is studying ancient Egypt right now for school. So the summer assignment is ancient Egypt. And I'm reading it going, this might not actually be true, because she's reading, the slaves are the ones who built the thing. I'm like, we might want to explore some other philosophy or some other ideas around this, because it's pretty much humanly impossible.
And of course, the question with Egypt is, why the further back do you go, the more advanced it seems. And there is a strong belief. Remember, when Plato 2,000 years ago wrote about Atlantis, he wrote about it as if it was a relatively recent occurrence, I mean, maybe just 2,000 years prior to that. We think Atlantis has become this thing so far back that is totally mythological, but there is a lot of suggestion that the advanced cosmology and construction ability and social stratification of Egypt was actually a remnant of, it was perhaps an outer colony or a part of what was left when Atlantis went down. It lost New York City and Tokyo. I mean, imagine what it would be like if today, in one sweep, all of a sudden, London, New York, Tokyo, Bangkok, Beijing, if these larger cities were gone, we would be left with technology that we might keep going, but eventually things would begin to decay. And of course, this is, part of the whole Mad Max, post-apocalyptic, sci-fi scenario. But back to disclosure, things are heating up. Where it's going to go, I don't know. How does it impact astrology? I think it impacts astrology by simply reaffirming that astrology has to do with a local space observation of the movement of those things that are going around that are cycles, and that the astrology of not only an extraterrestrial here visiting or maybe living even on Earth, for all we know, dolphins are extraterrestrials. We don't know where, but what happens when you go to another star and you go to a planet? Let's say the nearest planet now they're saying that is likely to be a life-bearing planet is as close as 4 light years away, around Alpha Centauri. And remember, 50 years ago, if you had told an astronomer, oh yeah, Earth is a planet, but there may be other planets out there, an astronomer would go, the odds are there may be other planets out there. Now we're discovering that stars have planets around them. I don't know the number now, but how many planets have been discovered and are being discovered regularly? It's just mind shattering.
Yeah, and it's funny too to think about how people who believed in life forms on other planets and say that they've seen UFOs or UAPs, that they were labeled as conspiracy theorists, and they were, go ahead.
Two things I want to get in. One is that the actual number is that there are over the first extrasolar planet. Just like extraterrestrial means not on Earth, extrasolar means outside of or not around the sun. Mm-hmm. There are the first one was discovered in 1992. Prior to that, there was no known other planets. There are now more than 4,000 named and identified, and there are about 6,000 others that are awaiting confirmation, that have already been noted. So there's 10,000 planets that we discovered in 20, 30 years. And before that, if you'd said there was a planet, you would have thought was crazy. Okay, last thing I want to say, that I just want to tie this back to astrology, is that that a contemporary, an associate of mine, a woman named Lynn Coiner, and you can Google her, Lynn Coiner, KOINER.com, did a talk a number of years ago at an astrology conference on the unexpected high preponderance of septiles at the moments of UFO observations and or alleged abductions. Now, remember, septiles are the alien, otherworldly, supernatural aspect that I've talked about here, and certainly in the fundamentals course significantly. But septiles show up in near-death experiences. Now, on Lynn's site, she wrote, Rick Levine attended my septiles lecture at the Midwest Astrology Conference in 2005. When I gave my findings for the signature of near-death experiences and UFO sightings, Rick told the audience that this was absolutely true. I don't know, absolutely. That afternoon, Rick incorporated this information into his own discussion on septiles, but he did so in such an astutely articulate manner that I hardly recognized that I was the source until he told the audience that I had just heard this in my lecture. I was so impressed. If you ever have a chance to hear Rick discuss septiles, please do. Now, the point here is that septiles are an aspect of other dimension, too complicated to fit into the three-dimensional world. And we get back to the fact, do these appearances of unidentified aerial phenomena or unknown origin of complex mathematical patterns that appear in wheat fields? You know, I mean, I have an astrologer friend or associate named Nick Collerstrom who authored this brilliant book on crop circles. And it's not at all about what are they, where did they come from, what do they mean? What it is a description from the first ones discovered year by year by year of the mathematical formulas and increasing mathematical complexity all throughout the entire time, that the mathematical complexity of them keeps becoming more and more complex, but the mathematics is absolutely intricate. Again, do aliens do this? Or is it somehow coming from some or extra dimensional reality? Or is this a result of our own minds swirling around doing something up there? Or is this a result of all the people, all the humans on Earth that are floating out there in the Bardo plains saying we need to get their attention so that they know that I don't have a clue. Nice talking with you. Nice talking with you.
It's so fascinating. I mean, and I think you covered in detail in the June forecast. If anybody's interested in diving deeper into the astrology of right now and why the astrology is indicating some sort of disclosure as well. I mean, that's like the whole year. I mean, there's a lot of disclosure starting this year. Yeah. But you did specifically talk about that for June. So if you want to go back and look at the podcast episode for the June forecast, it was. And
really I believe that we also have one way back on the Saturn-Pluto cycle. And whether or not I discussed it in that lecture or not, in my YouTube, which is in public domain on the history of the Saturn-Pluto cycle, there is a bit of a deeper dive into the whole intellectual, geocentric to heliocentric, to other galaxies, and that whole process tied to the Saturn-Pluto. In other words, the changing of intellectual boundaries.
Right. Well, I would love to hear more, especially about Mars and its connection to the pyramids. And I mean, we brought up so many amazing topics today, but we are out of time. So maybe we can cover some more. If you're interested in some more on these topics, please put it in the chat so we know, because this has been so much fun to explore. I want to thank the Inner Circle members who requested this topic. It was Bethany and I think Lynn, but thank you for suggesting this. And for those of you who are interested in seeing how Rick does chart readings, so how he actually uses astrology in his practice with people, you're going to get to participate in that in August. So as part of
we might see if we can get an alien to be one of the subjects. No,
that would be amazing. I mean, that would really be. I mean, yeah, that would be very cool. We could start testing a new type of astrology.
And that's going to be in August. We're going to have 4 weekly classes, sessions. If you can't make them, you can watch them later. But I'm going to be doing a chart of one person each week for 4 weeks. That person will be a registered participant in the class who I will have never met, and we'll be doing it live. So I will actually be doing the chart while I'm also talking to everyone who's in attendance, why I'm saying what I'm saying, where I'm getting it from, and then asking the person to respond or to corroborate or to correct us where we're wrong, so we can actually get the full swing of how this works and why it works and if it works, and learn from it.
Yes. So that's happening in August. If you want to get on the wait list for that, it's basically like a level 3 to Astrology Foundations level 1, Astrology Foundations level 2. And then this is the next version of that trilogy. And even if you haven't taken level 1 and level 2, if you're just interested in seeing how Rick does chart reading, you're welcome to join us. Level 1, level 2 is recommended for sure. You're going to learn how Rick approaches astrology. You'll learn about things like septiles and quincunxes and some of the things that Rick talks about a lot here on the show. So if you want to get on the wait list for this chart reading extravaganza in August, it's astrologyhub.com/charts.
And although I will be looking at septiles and quintiles and sextiles, I will not be looking at reptiles, infantiles, turnstiles, or kitchen tiles.
Right. Thank you so much, Rick. This has been so fascinating. And I just love that supposedly tomorrow or within a week or so, we're going to have more information coming. And it sounds like everybody in the audience does want to hear more about this, so we can start taking some of the pieces apart and diving even deeper.
Cool.
All right. So thanks everybody for being here. Thank you so much for being a part of our community. And thank you as always for making astrology and extraterrestrials a part of your life. We'll catch you on the next episode. Take care, everybody.